Well, let's see if that fixed it. Gonna start this back up. Just because that got messed up pretty bad, I'm gonna check every single space. Everything checks out. Add our new things and save our work again. There's not really any kind of end game involved at this point. There's no way to win. There's not even any logic to what the puzzle actually is. So, in the light of that, just to look up things, I'm going to go ahead and add a quit button to get to the credits scene from here. And we're going to need that game scene manager object, so we're going to make a prefab out of that from the title screen so we can reuse it in every scene. And now our button works the same in every scene. And we should be able to get through all three. And of course, nothing exists in that credit scene yet, so go ahead and add something, just another placeholder. And once we get here, we need a way to get back out, so we'll hook up a button to get back to the title screen. This button, just like the others. Now if we start back here from the beginning, we should be able to get through the whole cycle. Alright. So again, we're going to save that. And we'll update our notes. I'm going to go ahead and just recognize that I pull in a few more things, so I'm going to do that right now. So right now what's implemented is this basic behavior of clicking on one light and the ones around it toggling, and that's behavior that you see as I test it out right now. Which is this. I do have a debug mode I can use, which is what I'm doing right now, where I just toggle a single one, and that'll be used for level editing. So I can use that to demonstrate what these other ones will do. What I'm going to implement now are these row toggles and then this square toggle. And the way the row toggle is going to work is clicking, for example, this light, if it was one of these row toggles, it would actually toggle everything. And if this was a column toggle, clicking it would toggle that whole column. And the way that I envision this is that the puzzles will have sort of will be mostly the default cross-shaped toggle, but many of the lights could have these symbols on them that make them toggle a different shape to sort of mix up the type of puzzles that are possible. And the first thing that will be needed are some way of identifying those, so I'm going to pretty quickly make some basic sprites to identify the buttons. So we're going to do that now. Okay, so this would be basic shape. Actually, I realize I went too far. I only need this one part now. And we'll save the same thing as column. All right, and then our third icon is it's going to be a simple box shape. Of course, these start out pretty simple, and it's very likely to replace them later. Right now, the goal is just getting the point across. Alright, so the original plans for our two goals have gone pretty quick. Although, of course, that title and credit screen can use a lot more work. Does not really have any plans for what those are going to look like yet. So right now, the placeholders are all that we have. So we're going to move on to implementing these different space types: the row, column, and square toggles. And the first thing that's going to be added is just a new way for the edit mode. Right now we have this simple edit mode. Whenever I hold in the number pad 1 and click on one of these, rather than do the normal behavior, it will toggle a single one, and that's going to be used soon for actually editing levels, like so. And I'm going to bind the numpad 2 and click to toggle the type. So that is going to be implemented now. This will work just like the single space editing mode. An enumeration for the type of each cell. Default being cross. I'll make that the default for all cells. Not 100% sure how to increment the enums, but I'm pretty sure that we can do it just like this. And treat them like an integer. And just to make sure that this is working before I actually hook it up to do anything, moderately useful. I'll just log the new type as it's changed. See if that does everything it's supposed to do. If that was mostly right, and we can see it step through the different types here. But we don't want it to actually perform any operations in this case, so we'll also skip out the rest of the actual toggling, and I think just to make that behavior a little more explicit in the future, we'll just end this if into a consistent chain as so. It's not semantically different, but it's better for reading, I think. Now we've already made these symbols to put on the special types, so we're going to hook those up now. So because the symbols show the current type, it's going to make sense to include that even when the type is the default, which is going to be blank. So this should just make it a little bit easier to be consistent so that regardless of the cell type, it's always going to show a symbol even if that symbol is blank, rather than add in the additional logic of whether or not a symbol is shown on top of which symbol. As we're doing this, we're going to adjust a bit. I'm going to switch to this other UI background, at least for this placeholder graphics right now. I want to make sure that it matches the symbol colors that we're using, which is white. This game manager is useful for a lot of different objects within the scene to work with, so it's usually useful to make a simple way to access it, and I'm going to add that right now. Basically implementing a singleton pattern for the game manager object. And the reason that I'm doing this now is another common job I give to the game manager to sort of act as a global place to store at references to assets that I'm going to use during the runtime. So in this case, it's going to be a place to house various sprites that I need to load during use that I don't necessarily want to put into resources, because there's a few of them. It also makes it pretty easy to configure the various resources in use. These will match the enums for the types: cross, row, column, and square. Of course, these buttons also need access to change their sprites, so we're going to give them reference to that. Still look up at runtime. But remember, the button itself has an image component, so we only want to look up this in the children. This is where the game manager get instance method becomes useful. And right now I'm realizing that while I enumerated the things to do as creating these different pieces, that really the way I should have itemized the work to be done are the different things that were needed to do to support all these pieces rather than individual ones, which is adding the control for changing the type, the symbols to show. Those are all separate pieces, prerequisites for all of these, and I didn't really list those out. So once I get all these pieces in place, that really is a separate piece of work. I'm going to add that now. The current work being done, we'll check off this new item, and then we'll get into implementing the behavior of the individual pieces as the original tickets. And still a behavioral issue here because this should not be happening. Right. So it looks like we were toggling the item itself all the time, and we really only do is only toggle it if it's the special edit key is held, or the normal behavior for in-game, and not the toggle space at all if we're just changing the type. And I can already see right here what the problem is. It looks like the image is being changed on the button itself and not the image on the inside, which is not what we wanted. And while I could go ahead and fix that as is, this particular style button is just a placeholder in the first place, and so the easiest thing to do would actually be just remove the image that was going to be inside the button and instead allow the button to change in this way. Since this is still just in our prototype phase, it's a lot easier to just sort of roll with the hiccups and make them work for us instead of against us, rather than take any extra effort at this point. Because this doesn't have the nice border and padding built into the button sprite, I'm going to add a little bit there. Alright, that's definitely better. But I'm immediately seeing that there's an issue with the coloring combined with the type symbols, since once the entire thing is set to black, you can't see the symbol at all. So I think the idea of making the button the button's implicit image show the symbol is not actually the right way to go. I'm going to bring that back and fix what was actually broken in the first place instead of trying to roll with it. A nice idea, but looks like in practice it wasn't going to work. Although it does appear that going out of that is not going to work as a saved prefab. So instead we're going to redo just a little bit here, set these back up. image back into this. Now this happened because often get confused that a get component in children will also get the component from the self, which is a little counterintuitive for my taste, but I'll just live with that. One adjustment I will make is to make this explicitly an image for the symbol within the button. So it looks like I just hit a Unity crash. I'm going to go ahead and rebuild this pretty quickly. And when I bring that back up, I will add this image inside the button again, so I can control both the image of the color behind the button and the symbol on the button as two separate images. Which is what I need to do to have both the toggling on and off and the changing of symbol types. Just bear with me a few minutes here while I open this back up. Just be a minute here. And then because we've made that symbol image a separate reference to explicitly set, we'll go ahead and do that now. Apply that to all the tile prefabs and give this another try. In the end, I think this explicit kind of control over the references is often a lot more flexible and clear about how things are connected anyway. Right? Now this mostly works. I think in a non-prototype version, we're not going to want these black colors to be just a border, and that's happening because of the image that we're going to want to make that a transparent background instead, but for the purposes of a prototype, I think this works fine. And to that end, I'm going to go ahead and make a commit for the current stage of what's completed. And that means adding our sprites. And adding our Game Manager prefab, our changes to Game Manager class, and grid cell controller. So just commit this as implementing the edit UI for tile types, as we haven't actually hooked in any of the behavior yet. That's what we're going to do next. So all the differences in behavior are isolated to what happens down here in this clause. And I think to keep it clear, I'm going to separate out what happens into a few smaller methods of Excel. So our current behavior is called the normal toggle, which is the toggle for normal tiles that uses the cross shape. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and be a little more explicit and call that the cross toggle. And based on the current type, example, when the type is cross, we'll call cross toggle. And we're going to add this same pattern with methods that don't exist yet for row and column. And the square type. Of course, these three methods don't exist yet, so we'll go ahead and add empty implementations of those. And we'll go ahead and start implementing these now. Both the row and column toggles toggle themselves and everything else in their respective row or column. The square toggle does not toggle itself, so I won't include that first step. As a matter of fact, the square toggle is probably the easiest to implement first because it implements toggling the same as the cross except for itself and the corners around. So we're going to go ahead and implement that right here. Now if I change one to the square, I should see it toggle everything around versus the normal cross shape, and that works right. And just similar to that, implementing both these row and toggle should be pretty straightforward. As a matter of fact, I think we just treat the self as part of the whole row and just iterate through all the columns, of which there are 5. For the column is the first parameter, and the row is the row of the current cell. And obviously the implementation for column is going to be pretty similar. Taking the column of the current row and stepping over all the rows. Like this. Go ahead and try out all these right now. So here's our three types. Here's our normal behavior. And here are our apparently inverted implementations of rows and columns. So that is just something we had backwards. And now all these looking pretty correct. And this gives us, of course, great controls for simply toggling the various types and initial states of all the squares. So for example, I could easily change that center type and set a very specific pattern. And let's make this one of the levels in the eventual final game. Should give somebody a puzzle like this to solve. And that means that now I can check all that off and say that I have custom types, including row, column, and square toggles. And now I can take a look at what other steps may be coming up, because I have completed both the initial and extra sort of stretch goals for this session. I still have 17 minutes on my clock, and I have some time to finish a few other things. So I think I take care of a little low-hanging fruit about this little obsolete method that I forgot the replacement for. So I'm going to go ahead and look that up now. I'm going to guess if I just search for the current method, I'm going to see a pretty modern question somewhere about what the replacement is. So I'll just see if the documentation points to what that would be. Looks like the documentation mentions it's obsolete, but does not point us to the new and correct way of doing it. So that up. I know it's through the slightly newer scene manager, but I'm not actually as sure how to use that. And given that loading one scene to the next is such an integral part of Unity, I didn't expect it to be something I'd have to import separately, but that looks to be the correct step that I missed. So I'm going to go ahead and add that here and replace this. It looks like there's a pretty compatible load scene. Go ahead and try that out. Moving back to the title scene to test that we can walk through everything, just like we could with the out of date method. Alright, that all works. Save that as well. I do have level saving, loading, and selection listed here, but also realized I want to add an additional step that I didn't think about, which is what I will call end game detection. That is, when completing any of the puzzles, the logic that determines whether or not you've currently finished the current level, which would either advance you to the next level, um, or show you an end game if it is the last level. Level saving from the editing mode and level loading. Neither of these are really relevant until from within a particular level you can actually detect something happening. So I'm going to implement this now. And I think, at least for our current implementation, that this sort of clear board is definitely the way we want to go as far as what is determined for complete. We could have gone with all on or all off. Either would it be identical logic-wise. We're going to go for this because I think it'll be the cleanest to implement, or at least from where we're starting. We basically want a method on the grid itself to determine whether it is currently complete. And right now we're not going to trigger any particular behavior when this happens. We're just going to test the implementation of whether or not it is complete, and then we'll hook that up to some sort of behavior. Right now these cells are not allowing anything outside of them to tell whether or not they're on or off, but the grid's going to need to have to see this in order to figure out whether or not they're currently complete. So we're going to go ahead and allow that to be read from the outside, but still only settable by internal methods of the grid cell controller. And then what we'll do to check that is very simply to just step over all the cells, and if any of them are off, make sure that we default to on. And if any of them are off, we'll return false. And if you get all the way to the end and there's still none had been off, then all of them are on. And just for testing purposes, add a couple of debug lines just to tell us whether or not we currently think puzzle is complete. And we need to invoke this from somewhere, so every time the user clicks on a tile and triggers a toggle, go ahead and ask the grid what it thinks. Everything looks just what it should be here. Get rid of those debug messages then. Move this endgame detection to the current session since that's where we're actually implementing it. Right now there's no additional levels to advance to. There's not really any endgame, so this detection we're going to make sure it's implemented. We're just going to put in some sort of indicator for our own purposes of editing that we currently consider the current level complete. Like I said, this is just a useful debug information right now, so this won't even be present in the final version. Right now it'll just tell us whether or not the game is able to track when a level is complete. Useful whenever we're editing levels is to identify when we've completed our own test levels. I think it's going to be a responsibility of the game manager to respond in some way when the current level is complete. And I need to figure out how to programmatically trigger that toggle, so I'll look that up. So that'll be a side effect of the level being found complete. And since we'll check the box to determine that it's currently complete, we're also going to want to uncheck it as a default. Now, of course, in our current pre-editor mode, the level already starts off blank, which is technically matching the logic for complete, but we only trigger it after a user interaction. So this won't be marked complete unless we interact with the board and make it incomplete and then back. And everything worked fine. So we're going to go ahead and make a new commit, which will add logic to detect endgame of a clear board and detection debug feature, which we'll remove later. Alright, since we only have a few minutes left, I'm going to use that to sort of recap what's been done in this session. And so initially I only had these very few small things, probably thrown off by the initial setup required for the first session. I didn't really expect to be able to get much done in the second. Instead, I got a lot more than I anticipated, which is great. A little bit ahead of my expectations, which is a fantastic place to be in. Now in the next session, I think it would be good to expand this preliminary level editor that I have and actually be able to save, load, and select the levels, which I think is a pretty reasonable set of bytes to chew on the next session. So we're going to go ahead and move those over. So we already have the editor in place. The next session will implement saving those levels that we've edited and probably being able to save which level number they go to so that we can start to build up a sequence of levels through the game. For testing out and those levels that we've already built, we'll implement some sort of a loading function. And for the user themselves, we'll implement a level selection that allows for picking in the levels that we've already had saved. And I think it would be worth noting that one of the things this will require is learning how to save data from within this editing mode that we can then include in the game and load in the play mode. So building any kind of editor like this is not something that I've done, so it's one of the things I wanted to learn is how to build a level editor inside of the game itself and then get that data out of the edit or play mode in a way that can still be included, committed into code. So that'll be an interesting new step to learn, and we'll also want to make sure that these features begin to get flagged for being removed in production mode and are only included when being run in the editor. So be a few extra pieces to learn to do those, and those will all be useful new abilities to learn in Unity itself, and also will give a pretty good groundwork for being able to build up all the levels that are going to make the final game. And these first two sessions went great, and I think the third one is going to be even more productive. So I'm definitely looking forward to it, and I hope anybody else is as well. Have a nice day. Hope you enjoyed.